Perek Mishna. And in our Mishnah we're discussing how to demolish an oven. And although, if you remember from a previous Mishnah, we discussed demolishing an oven by cutting it horizontally, and if the height of the remnant of the oven is less than 4 tefachim, it's considered demolished, according to Rabbi Meir. Or according to the Chachamim, you have to reduce it to less than the majority of the original height. Look back at that Mishnah for the details. But in our Mishnah, we're discussing, if you have an oven, how to demolish it by cutting it vertically. So you end up with 2 halves of an oven. 2 halves of an oven. And interestingly, our Mishnah says that just by slicing it in half like this is not sufficient to demolish the oven, because inevitably one of the 2 halves is going to have the majority of the circumference of the original oven, and therefore you could bake in it and it's still considered having a teichen inside. And what you need to do, therefore, is to cut it into 3 sections, so that no one section has the majority of the original circumference. So let's read it inside. The Mishnah starts, Taner shenitma, an oven that became tameh, keitzad mitahar naisai. How do you purify it? The Mishnah rules, chol kol ishloisha. You break it into 3 parts, so no one part has the majority of the circumference. The Mishnah goes on, there's one more thing you need to do. Vigorer, and you scrape esat fela, you scrape the coating. If you remember that their ovens had clay coatings to retain the heat. And you have to scrape that coating ad sheyehei baretz, until you reach the ground. So according to the Tanakama, again you have this oven, and the oven had a coating around it, a coating of insulation. So you have to cut it in 3 separate sections, so no one section of the oven has the majority of the circumference, and then it's tahar. And remember, you have to cut the coating and the oven all the way to the ground. A clean cut down. Now the reason why you also have to cut the coating of insulation is because if you only cut from the inside the actual oven, so although the actual oven is broken, but since the coating around it is sort of holding it up and keeping it together, so it's not considered broken, and therefore you also need to cut the oven with its insulation to complete the breaking of the oven. Which brings us to Rabbi Meir's shita. So again, this was the Tanakama. Now we're going to have it Rabbi Meir. So let's read the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says, Eino tzarich ligres atfela. You don't have to scrape any of the coating. Just because the coating is holding it up, as long as you break the oven itself, that's considered broken. Not only that, v'lo sheyehei baretz. You don't even have to cut the oven until it reaches the ground. Ella, rather, you reduce it from the inside, you cut it from the inside, arba tvachim, until it's not 4 tvachim tall. So again, according to Rabbi Meir, you have this oven, and around the oven you have that clay coating to retain the heat. And according to Rabbi Meir, you don't have to cut that coating at all. You just break it from the inside, the actual oven, into 3 parts. And even that inside that you break, you don't have to cut it all the way down. You could leave a height of less than 4 tefachim, which is the minimal height of an oven. So now the oven's not tall enough, and it's considered demolished. So that's Rabbi Meir's shita. Now, which brings us to Rabbi Shimon's shita. Rabbi Shimon is going to be the most stringent. Rabbi Shimon says, V'tzarich lahasio. Not only do you have to break the actual oven down to the ground, and you have to break the coating of clay down to the ground, but you also need to lahasio, which means to travel, to move. You have to move those 3 sections away from each other. Because even if they're merely close to each other, you could still use them. You could still use it as one oven since they're close to each other. So you have to move them away from each other. So you would end up with 3 sections of an oven that you have to move away from each other. And again, each one has its coating around it. So you would end up with 3 parts that are completely separate from each other. And then, according to Rabbi Shimon, you're mitayr an oven. Now the Mishnah goes on. Chilkol l'shnayim. What happened if you only cut it into 2? Echad gadol v'echad katan. So one has the majority, one has the minority. So the Mishnah rules, as we explained in the beginning, hagadol tameh, the one with the majority is tameh, v'hakatan tar, and the smaller one is tar. Now, just to show us that it has nothing to do with how many cuts you make, rather it has to do with if you have the majority of the original vessel or not, the Mishnah goes on to explain, chalakol ishloshu, even if you cut into 3 parts, but echad gadol kishnayim, if one is greater than the other 2, and it still has the majority of the original oven, so hagadol tameh. So the big one is still tameh. Because the other 2 were small cuts, and this big piece still has rov of the original circumference. Vishnayim haktanim, and the 2 smaller ones are tahorin, are tar. So the point is that each section of the demolished oven can't have the majority circumference of the original oven. Now it's your turn to read.